grew up in Sydney, so grew up kind of not too far away from sort of Bronte Beach or Coogee Beach in Sydney, and look, had a really lovely childhood. Had I think had a very loving, supporting home, and I think grew up as far as sort of, I think on the business side of things, I grew up with a dad who went out, was an architect, and then went out on his own and sort of started his own firm and started very small, but built it into something, really quite meaningful. By the end, they sort of had 60, 70 employees and were very well known in a few areas, a couple of, niches as being the best in Australia. And I think sort of, grew up in an environment where, again, a lot of our other family, one of my uncles was an entrepreneur as well. And so there was just there was a degree of, I suppose a privileged degree, to be honest, of having something where you sort of, this sort of a path wasn't totally foreign. That being said, I still think when we, growing up, still had no idea what I wanted to do, but yeah, had a really lovely childhood, living in the glory that is Sydney.
Yeah, so growing up around all these entrepreneurs, going back to what you said, you never saw yourself as an entrepreneur, but did you always have an idea of what you wanted to do when you grew up at some point?
No, not really.
Okay.
I sort of knew that I had this idea that I sort of wanted to be a businessman, but I didn't really know sort of what, because I think when you grow up, there was, at least for me, there were these sort of generic buckets of lawyer, didn't want to be that, doctor, didn't want to be that, banker, didn't really want to be that. I sort of didn't really, these sort of broad generic ones, I didn't really know what I wanted. And that sort of carried forth to uni. I went and did an arts degree because I was really excited about doing that. And sort of, I'm a huge sort of history and into politics and languages. And so I really enjoyed that. But from that, I sort of, to be honest, my path out of that, I interned at a consulting company during uni, and that was partially cool, I will learn what I don't like by working in a bunch of different industries and figuring out, which paths, aren't right for me, which is sort of a weird, I think a lot of people go into consulting again because they sort of don't really know what they want. But I think luckily for me, I sort of stumbled into it, after finishing uni. My uncle, who was entrepreneurial, as I said before, he was involved in this venture, and that sort of started me down my own path. But again, that was sort of lucky and by chance. I would even say, and I didn't graduate that long ago, but I graduated from uni from high school rather, in 2003. Tech wasn't really a thing. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't there wasn't a big scene in Australia that was I never thought to myself, I'll work for a software company. So I'm obviously incredibly glad that I did, and I have worked for a bunch of different software companies now. But yeah, I didn't really have any sort of clear path in my head, to be honest.
And this consulting firm you joined, it was McKinsey, is that right?
Yeah, just interned.
Yeah. What was the process like getting into that? Because anyone who knows consulting firms knows that if you're in McKinsey, you're likely to be an overachiever to some degree.
Yeah, I think so. I think the luckiest, so I had the same opinion, to be honest. And so I went in, so they had a program where they did, they took one intern from Melbourne Uni and one intern from Sydney Uni at the time. And I applied thinking that I had absolutely no chance. I was like, this is absolutely ludicrous. There's no way I'm getting this thing. But I was like, but this will be as you say, they're known to be excellent. And so I thought this will be a great experience, learn what the best level of interviewing is. And sort of, if I can get good at this, even if not good enough to get a job, but good at this, this will be a useful skill for me to have if I go and interview other places, whether that's again, I was sort of thinking about consulting a little bit at that stage, so whether it was one of the big four or Bain or, BCG. And so, so I went into it though, just being well, I'll just prepare really hard. And they sort of list all their questions online. They're sort of hey, here, we're going to ask you about these 4 areas. And then we're going to do a question, like literally they tell you the 4 questions they'll ask you, which is half of the interview. And then the other half is a case study. And so, they'll give you a question and you have to go and sort of figure it out and work it through. And so, I just made sure I was perfectly prepared for the 4 questions that were like, I'm like, okay, well, so I wrote out long form, my answers, I had different answers, so I had 2 different answers for each of them. And I wrote that out long form, and I broke it down to bullet points. And I just was like, okay, cool. If I was here are the key themes I want to hit on each of those. So like I made sure I nailed that part. And then the case studies, you can do a couple of practice ones online, but really it just like was going in there and just having fun with it. And to be honest, I did. I genuinely had fun with it. They'd get in there and be like describing a situation which was like a large domestic airline that we worked with recently. Like, okay, I wonder who that could be.
Yeah.
But they sort of describe these interesting problems, and then you just get to like talk about them and try to tease them out and discuss them and figure out what was going on. And look, I honestly went in just to have fun and to be. And I had put no pressure on myself. And I think that was entirely the magic, because I knew some other friends who went in really, really badly wanting it. And so, look, I think that was a weird experience, but it was certainly a great one for me.
Kind of like pitching to an investor, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's a nice way of framing it. I mean, I think that there is some magic in the thirstier you are, like the more pressure you put on yourself, the harder it is to perform. And I think that we certainly think about the investing process as a sales process. And it's, that in a sales funnel, you don't have like a 1-to-1 conversion rate from top of funnel to bottom of funnel, right? Like you have to have a large pipeline come in to be able to get some customers at the end of it. It's the same with pitching for VC, or pitching for angel investing or whatever. You have to have, I think when we did our seed round, or certainly for our Series A, we had about 50 people at the top.
Wow.
And at the end, we have one lead investor. It's Airtree, and we had some other, Skip Capital, and others came on board as well. But we had, more than one term sheet, which is obviously very important to have on that side for a little bit of leverage. But we spoke to I think it was ended up being 55 VCs for that round. And but again, you do that, and you kind of have each particular pitch doesn't have as much pressure on it. Like we were pretty nervous pitching to Andreessen and a few other places like that, but generally speaking, I think you get into a rhythm and you learn your way through it. And I would say there was maybe something kind of similar there.
Awesome. So before we jump into Qwilr, after you left McKinsey as an intern, you actually worked at 2 different tech companies. Read How You Want as their Australian manager, sort of like I understand it to be kind of like a Kindle kind of competitor, and then you became a strategic partner development manager at Google. So how would you encapsulate your time at these 2 companies before the Qwilr days?
Yeah, so Read How You Want was it's an ebook conversion software company at the time, and so Kindle had just come out, the iPhone had just come out in 2007, and so I joined in 2008, and basically every publisher had PDFs of their book, and they were looking to get them into file formats that would work on these different devices. And at the time, there hadn't been a winner in file formats. So Microsoft had its ebook version, Kindle had one, BlackBerry had one. There was a couple of open source ones, including EPUB, which basically Kindle's version and EPUB are sort of the 2 defaults that won. But there were 5 formats that you would want to convert a book into. And we had this clever bit of software that sort of sat in between the file and the format. So rather than doing a 1-to-1 conversion each time, you would just convert it to this one sort of deeply, XML tagged middleware sort of spot. And then the software would just do all the conversions from there, which was really cool because they were then able to do a bunch of interesting stuff around books into audiobooks for the blind, into versions of Braille. And of course, there's many different versions of Braille, which is completely insane, but there are. And then, into large print, other sort of interesting formats on that side. So even for dyslexics can order, if you have, there's a huge variety of different types of dyslexia out there. And so you can order books sort of with custom styles to help you with your reading. And so anyway, they're playing around with lots of interesting stuff there. But really, the ebook conversion part was just like going bonkers. And we could, because of our tech, could charge at a lower rate than everybody else at the time. We had this first year there where we just like, we made so much money and we grew at such an incredibly fast rate, and it was tremendously exciting. And then in the second year, it became incredibly clear that the price for this conversion task was going to be driven down to zero, like eventually. And now it is. It's like there's just like software out there that you just upload a file and it just becomes an EPUB. And yeah, like we sort of were like, okay, crap. And so the company has pivoted a few times since then. But I was lucky enough at that stage that we'd become quite a well-known little startup, especially in the digital publishing space. And so I got invited to speak at a bunch of different conferences and events. And at one of them, I met a guy from Google, and wonderfully, we got along really well. And luckily for me, they were sort of starting to look for someone to join their team to work on. So the team at Google was like a partnership, like a media partnership team. So product partnerships is the broad group, and R1 specialized in media. And then within media, we specialized in so print media. So academic, textbooks, trade publishing, newspapers, magazines, etc., like that whole world. And Google was gearing up to launch what became the Play Store. So like, having an ebook store on there, having a digital magazine store, eventually a newsstand, as well as like movies, TV, music, etc. And so they were looking for someone to run what was then called Google eBooks in Australia. And so all the work I'd been doing around speaking to Penguin and Random House and Macmillan and all these companies, trying to get them to convert their ebooks with us, meant that I knew the industry really well. I knew the software well. I knew sort of how ebooks worked. I knew which publishers in the region had been using us and using our competitors. And so who was quite far along the digital journey and who was a bit of a laggard and whatever else. And so it ended up being a very lucky sort of perfect fit for me to sort of slot into that team. And so over the next little while, I got to work. Working at Google was fantastic. And I got to work, largely on, I did some deals for the search team. So around like Google Scholar, Google Book Search, Google News, like sort of stuff around that, which was interesting. Especially as like a lot of the book publishers were still suing Google for like their Google Library project and various like claims of copyright infringement, which made for interesting negotiations. But yeah, it was a really wonderful time because I mainly got to work on Android, and Android was just exploding. Like the internal charts and numbers each month were just completely insane as to how fast that was growing. It's from like 2010 through 2013, and it was just completely insane. And really exciting and wonderful. And I think just to sort of be part of that, the Google Play Store, I remember, them being like, having this huge audacious goal of doing $1 billion in revenue through the store, like apps and books and everything else. And when I left, they were like, the goal for that year had been 5 billion, and they were well on path to smashing it. And you're like, it's just, you don't see, obviously they take their cut of that, and then there's, deals with telcos and whatever else. So they don't really, the 30% gets divvied up even further, but still it was a bonkers business, and it was a wonderful, experience to be part of on that side.
Did you have to adapt to that whole exponential growth mindset? Because someone coming in, you hear $1 billion and, I reckon a lot of people would freak out at that number.
So like, it was funny because I didn't own any revenue. It was just the way it sort of worked for me was, hey, we want to launch, this new version of Google Play in New Zealand in 4 months. So we need you to sign. We want to have like of the top 100 books that are selling in New Zealand right now. We want to have 90% of them at launch. So that we have a good collection on that side, and then we also want to make sure we have another X thousand of books available, so that we'll have our international catalog, we'll have our Australian catalog, but then we've actually got at least 5,000, I think it was at the time, like 5,000 books, New Zealand books that were on there. So we had like good local content as well, and maybe you'd also want to do a deal with like a local, newspaper in New Zealand. So you could like, have their book review sections embedded in there. And again, work on a deal to get like music and TV and movie reviews as well, sort of embedded in the Play Store. And just like, so I didn't have a revenue number on that side. That was sort of happened sort of later stage, but like, it was this very fun thing of being like, okay, we've got 5 months to close a shitload of deals. And that was a challenge. And, the fun thing, the glorious thing about this job was like having worked at a startup, doing all these cold calls to like Macmillan and Co. and trying to get them to do their ebook conversions with us. And we had a great product and like real, like meaningful product market fit, but we were complete no name. And who was I? Some 20 something. I remember I grew a beard to try to seem older. So I would at least seem like late 20s when I was doing this work. But let me tell you, cold calling from Google is just a gloriously special experience, especially in like 2010, 2011, because like it was just endless. Like it was just people like, oh, let me put you through to the head of rights or to the CEO or to whatever. It was amazing.
That's awesome. So you've had this amazing time at Google. How did you then come up with the idea for Qwilr? What was the catalyst that really kicked that off?
Yeah, so not my idea, which is the wonderful part. So it was very easy for me. My co-founder Dylan had the idea. So he had been, the basic story behind Qwilr is Dylan had been running his own sort of agency, he's a software developer and a designer. And so he'd been doing software developing and design, relatively full stack jobs. And so he'd been working for, by that stage, Saatchi and Saatchi and Ogilvy and Victorian Government and Belvoir Theatre in Sydney and in other places. And so he had, his big thing though was he just hated the process of building pitch docs and proposals. Because you go do pricing in Excel, you then go do your copy in Word, and then you sort of take them both together into InDesign, try to make something looks nice, and then you send it to the client, they want a whole bunch of changes. InDesign sucks, so you have to rip it all apart and then re-put it together again. And so he also was like, what I'm selling is a digital service. So why am I pitching in this, fundamentally non-digital, like old school format? And so, he then started doing what was completely insane, which was in sort of like 2011, 2012, he would hand code a website for every single proposal he sent out.
Wow.
So he would just be like, you guys would ask for a proposal and he'd be like, cool, okay, I'm going to build your website, which, back in those days took like 3 days, maybe 4 days to do for every single pitch. Now, he didn't do many pitches and he won them at an incredibly high rate. And also it was, some of a proof of concept. Like if you're, asking someone to do, work for you on your like app and your website and whatever else, and you get given a website as the pitch, it's kind of proves that you can do it to some degree. So the first version of Qwilr really was like a series of bash scripts and other little tricks that he'd made to sort of make this process faster. And a sort of a watershed moment for him was, he spoke to Saatchi and Saatchi New Zealand in the morning. He sent them a website as a proposal that afternoon. The MD of Saatchi and Saatchi called him like immediately. MD of Saatchi New Zealand called him immediately, being like, "How did you do this? Like, is this a product? Like, can we use this? Like, this is amazing." And he was like, "No way." He'd done a product company before and it'd been a complete nightmare. And he's like, "No way. This is like never. I'm not doing this. It's going to be way too hard." But it like started that idea ticking along. And so he ended up building the first basic version that we ended up scrapping because it was kind of a little bit more akin to WordPress rather than a true like WYSIWYG, beautiful, simple, easy interface. But he built this first version and I was at the time, I was working for Google in New York. I was back in Sydney for a wedding. I was looking to come home for various reasons. But really looking to be involved in the startup. Like I had a wonderful time at Google. And I say to a lot of people in their career, like if you can have a couple of years at a startup early on and a couple of years at a big, excellent company, or even like a medium-sized company or whatever, I think like having a few years in your 20s where you're now look, maybe you want to found something early and that's great too. But like, I think before founding a company, having a little bit of a taste of startup, was great. And having a taste of McKinsey was great. And having a taste of Google, like it sort of, you sort of had different levels of excellence. And I think that that was a really enjoyable experience. But I really wanted to get back into startup land quite badly. And so I was sort of back for this wedding, but I was lined up all these meetings to try to find a way in to sort of go on that side, and bumped into, as chance happens, bumped into Dylan at the wedding, and we got talking. And you know, it was very funny. He was like, "Oh, do you know this person?" And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't met him yet, but I was meeting him that week." And he was already trying to matchmake Dylan and I, and sort of, he actually was an investor who wrote us our first check.
Wow.
Thank you, Gary at Right Click Capital. Always close to our hearts. But yeah, no, I came back and Dylan had this fantastic idea. And from my side, it really was someone to be non-technical, to be able to build something that was so beautiful and powerful and intelligent so quickly. And obviously I was a bit lucky because I'd had this background of, you know, when I was at Google in Sydney, there'd been this product called Google Wave, which they built, and it was sort of meant to be the future of like communication and collaboration. It didn't really pan out. They got killed. Then a lot of that team got put on a Google Docs team, and actually some of the early, like the real deep collaboration that came on Google Docs was actually all the tech was from Wave. So if you remember when like you used to have like colored cursors, and I could see Jason typing with his orange cursor, and I was a purple cursor, and you could see
like the
Mark
green
typing.
highlights and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that sort of first version around about like 2011 or so was all Wave tech. But there was this sort of conversation of like, okay, well, Wave wasn't the future, but Google Docs is just a Microsoft clone. Like that's not the future either. Like, what is the future of this sort of thing? And to see what Dylan had built, which is just like allows anyone to build a very lightweight web page. The document is a very lightweight web page, incredibly quickly, incredibly easily. It's a very intuitive, simple, you know, drag in an image, click here, type, you know, this sort of nice sort of flow. But once you've done it as a web page, like you get all these amazing benefits from like the web kind of, you know, for free. I mean, I say for free, it's taken a hell of a lot of work, but like, you know, you get the ability, like you can embed videos, you can embed forms, you can embed Calendlies, you can embed, you know, maps, you can embed any other sort of content, interactive content. You also can have buttons that do things. So you can be like, you know, hey, here's our quote, you know, gold, silver, bronze package. Oh, I want the silver package, but I don't want this optional extra, but I do want this one. And all of a sudden you have a buying experience that looks, for a B2B sales team, that looks way more like an e-commerce or a marketplace sort of experience or a SaaS experience. It's so much nicer. It's so much faster. And then you can sort of, you know, obviously accept e-sign and pay on any device anywhere around the world. And so all of this stuff, plus like analytics, integrations, pushing and pulling data from Salesforce or whatever, like HubSpot, which is a huge integration for us. I think all of this sort of stuff is possible in a way that, you know, files, you know, Word, PowerPoint, PDF, like they just fundamentally suck on the internet. Like they cause more problems than they're worth. And I think like, you know, they're only really here because of, you know, this enduring Microsoft monopoly and to some degree the Adobe monopoly as well. So I think that, you know, when I saw what he built, I was like, this is tremendously exciting. And so when I did finally move back, you know, he and I started working together, I think 2 or 3 days a week for free, just seeing what it would feel like. And that felt great. And then we sort of, you know, got into it, and then Gary wrote us a check and we were on our way.
Awesome. That's actually a great segue to my next question. You know, a lot of people say, oh, getting into a co-founder relationship is like being to marriage and you got to try it out first. You sound like you and Dylan kind of jumped head in. How did you know that you two work well together, especially since you've never met Dylan before at that point?
No. So sorry, let me clarify that side. So Dylan and I have been friends, had been friendly since we were teenagers. So
gotcha.
not like super close, but like, but we you know, he'd been in, we'd gone to the same house parties. We went to different schools, but like the girls we hung out with were from the same school, if that makes sense. So we would sort of see each other at various parties. And he was like, I actually knew him as a musician, like a really talented musician. I went to see his band play a bunch of times during uni. And, you know, again, we weren't close at all, but we were friendly, and I sort of knew who he was. And I thought he was like nice and smart and whatever. And a few of our friends, like we both had some mutual friends who were quite close with each of us. So at this wedding, I'd come back to where I bumped into Dylan. We started talking. Like we already had a history together. Oh, funny to see you here. You know, hey, you know, da da da. And then it was this funny sort of serendipity that led us down this path. You know, when I came back, all that being said though, when I came back, I still had, like, when we started working together, I had 2 other things I was considering pretty seriously. And so, you know, we did spend, you know, a few months working together, just working for free, no obligation on his side, no obligation on my side. Just really just sort of trying to set it up so that we had, like, you know, a degree of, you know, that feel for, can this actually work? And I think we were very lucky that we'd had that. I think there was just a level of trust that was easy there because we'd known each other from some degree, but also because there was this, like, nice social pressure of, like, we've got a bunch of mutual friends. So if I was an asshole to him or he was an asshole to me, it would actually have meaningful blowback on our lives, which I think helped. And then also just, like, I think working together in a no pressure way for a while was also good. And, you know, it's like, it's a funny thing, and it is a little bit like a marriage. And I think that, you know, we were pretty, like, I was pretty firm early on, you know, about, like, I don't think 50-50 splits are good ideas. I think there needs to be someone who's in charge who can make a decision. And, like, it was Dylan's original idea and he'd done all the work on it and whatever else. So that felt pretty clear, like, he should be in that position. And I think that makes sense. And I've never regretted my decision on that part at all. And I think that, you know, obviously he takes what I say very, very seriously, and we try not to go against each other, but, like, you know, and there are areas of business that I own, obviously, that I'll take his opinion very, very, very seriously, but it's still my decision on what to go on that side. So I think I think also another part that's been quite nice for us is Dylan is very good at engineering and design. I'm very good at operations and, like, customer facing stuff. And so I think that there's been a relatively natural split between those 2 areas. Not perfect, of course. There's definitely messy parts in the middle, but I think that's put us in pretty good stead.
Awesome. And can you remember what your first paying customer was like for the 2 of you?
So yeah, I can. I think well, I'm 90% sure that it's not our very first. It's one of our first customers. It was actually the law firm that helped us incorporate back in the day. So we were a customer of theirs, and no doubt we just paid them $5,000. So them paying us, you know, $25 a month wasn't a particularly fair transfer. But I think if they're not a customer still, I think they might still be a customer. And certainly if not, they were a customer for many, many years. A firm out of Melbourne called General Standards. Kurt Falkenstein, shout out
Kurt. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Get your company incorporated with Kurt. He's the best. He's the best at sort of helping out in those early days. And we don't use him anymore, but we used him for years. I mean, truly is such a great steward from startup, you know, all the way through our seed docs, like, you know, all the way for, like, really a long time. Like, they are a really wonderful firm. So shout out Kurt. But yeah, so so they joined and they started using Qwilr, and that was great. And we had a few others. There's another business called Trapdoor, which is a video production company. We had a lot of success with video production companies just generally because, like, being able to embed videos in your quote is, like, wonderful and meaningful and looks great. Called Trapdoor. They were one of our first, you know, definitely our first 50 customers, and they've since launched their own startup called Shootster, which is doing awesomely. Like, they're doing really well, and that account keeps expanding. I think they've still got the old Trapdoor business as well. But, like, that's a wonderful startup that's sort of been this cool thing to see as we sort of, you know, as we're growing, they're also growing. So it's been awesome to have some of those early customers stick around.
That's awesome. And what was your growth strategy at that point as a young startup who hasn't really made a name for itself yet? How did you get, you know, your customers on board?
Yeah, it's all, man. Like, it's just outbound sales. Like, I would just get in touch with every single human being I thought could find Qwilr useful, and every single inbound. We had, you know, a free product at the time, and, you know, very, very, very low barrier to entry. But every single person we could, I would just, like, email them straight away. You know, try to get on the phone with them straight away. Give them the whitest glove onboarding as possible. Like, try and do custom stuff. Like, just, you know, our goal was, you know, we're sort of, he's not perfect on everything by a long stretch, but I do love a lot of Jason Lim's little catchphrases. He's sort of a bit of a SaaS guru, runs SaaSta, but he has this lovely thing of like getting 10 unaffiliated, like, you know, people to buy your software. Like, who are you? Like, why should they do that? That's crazy. But if you can get 10, you know, you can definitely get 20. If you can get 20, you can definitely get 50. And like, it's sort of nice, sort of simple flow. And to be honest, we're still there. Like, we still have like, oh, well, we've got this many thousand. So like, you know, why can't we get this next level? And I think, you know, the world is huge, but I think in that early days, it was just like, get to 10, and then get to 20, and then and once you start getting to like, you know, about 50 to 100, you start to think, okay, well, how do we automate this a little bit better? How can we go a bit further along here? And at about 100, we started to see people properly really going through and doing self-serve, like kind of no to very low touch started to occur. Something be like, who's this person who just started paying us? Like, I haven't spoken. We had like one other sales rep at the time. Like, have you spoken to him? I haven't spoken to him. Like, you know, what's going on? And so, you know, that was pretty exciting. But I think in the early days, it really was very heavy on sales. And I'm a big believer in sales because, like, man, I heard no a lot. And that's important. Like, it's really important to hear no and then to ask why and try to understand and say, and then sort of say, hey, look, if we could make improvements on X, Y, Z, you know, would you come on board? And often it's still no, but like, but sometimes it's a yes. And then you sort of, you know, you write that down and you sort of, you know, keep track with them and start trying to stay in touch and, you know, really, and then again, like with your current customers, like just doing everything you can to give them a truly excellent experience. And, you know, they hopefully will refer you. And I think all that sort of stuff, I think the early stage is like, it's really, really important to do it. And it's also really important for founders to do it because like the founders need to hear that. They need to learn and all that sort of stuff. And then, you know, you get your first rep and, you know, you add some crazy hustler onto the team and they do some stuff and that's great. And then, you know, you sort of, you know, there's a whole bloody journey from there on. But yeah, I think that early phase, it has to be very manual. It has to be very basic. And look, we did some other stuff as well, you know, trying to be clever around marketing, but to be honest, that was a lot of the early driver.
Speaking of Jason Lim, what's Mark Tanner's #1 tip for outbound sales?
Outbound sales in the early days?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's just don't try to scale it. Don't think about scale. You just need to celebrate. You just need to celebrate every small win. You know, it's just like, if you're doing outbound, it's like, write every email by hand. Don't put them on a sequence. You know, or don't worry about sort of building some perfect sequence. You know, I think this is the very early days. Now, like once you've done it, had some success, like sure, go look back and figure it out and start maybe making some basic sequences. But even then, the first email, I wouldn't put on a sequence straight away. I'd try like 1 or 2 emails that are very, very personal first. And look, obviously, if you can avoid outbound by like getting warm intros from anyone, you know, even the lukewarmest of like the mildest, like, you know, almost a cool intro, even that's fine. Like, or sort of doing an inferred intro of like, hey, we both know so-and-so, even though it's not an intro. But I think like, you know, I spent a heap of time just doing that basic stuff. And I think that, you know, everyone kind of can tell when they're on a sequence these days and kind of, you know, often kind of hate it. And I think just, you know, having those milestones of like, my goal is to get a reply. And then like when you get a reply, like you celebrate. Okay, now my goal is to get a call or book a demo really. And then like, I would drive out. So Trapdoor, who, you know, early customer, like I like drove for like, I don't know, 40 minutes to go and see them.
Wow.
The demo in person. And then like, you know, drove back because like, what else am I doing that day? Like, it's also like, you know, it matters to like spend time with those people. And I think a lot of people there's endless rabbit holes you can go down of like trying to perfect things. Just write the email and just send it off and then find another person who, you know what, I think this looks like a perfect fit for this company. Write them an email, send it off. And like, I think the other side of this is like, if you're going to go and do a sale on this side, so some companies will, in the early days, and we made this mistake too. So, but in the early days, I think sometimes it can be like, oh, you can use it for free. No, don't do that. That's not interesting. Make them pay. It doesn't have to be much. It can be like $10 a month or 25 or whatever, but it's like, it's so much more valuable if they're paying something for it, and maybe you discount it or whatever, but like, or you say like, we'll be very generous on refunds or blah, blah, blah. But like, once people pay for things, that their commitment to the product is so much more. And I do think that like, there are companies out there that are, Canva's the obvious one that comes to mind, that are explicitly designed for free initially, and they have a whole strategy around that. And like that's can make total sense. But I do think there is real magic in like making people pay and like learning from what it takes to have them pay, and hearing no, because once you ask for the money, like everyone will say, oh yeah, I'll use that for free, but it doesn't really mean anything. Like it's sort of, I'd say like, yeah. So don't try to scale too early, and do charge.
That's that's a bunch of gold nuggets in there for the listeners. So don't scale, don't be afraid of no, and make customers pay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. That's great advice. So moving on to your fundraising for Qwilr, you've now raised 3 times. The first one you mentioned, a seed investment from Sydney Seed Fund from Gary. You've also raised 1.5 mil in 2017 from Point 9 Capital, and subsequently the 10.8 million Series A from Airtree, Skip Capital, etc. Could you share with us some learnings from those 3 experiences, and how different was it raising those 3 very different rounds?
Yeah. So there's been more than 3.
Oh wow! Okay.
No. Well, it's just there's some get put in the press and some don't. But look, I think the first one was honestly, Gary had known Dylan and had been advising him. I'd been introduced to Gary at Sydney Seed Fund, and as a sort of someone who I should speak to find out who was interesting in the Sydney scene that I should think about working with. And Gary had been trying to matchmake Dylan and I before he'd met me. So once we sort of started our business, Gary came along, and Sydney Seed Fund's whole model was, there's going to be a wave of new interesting companies coming out of Sydney. They raised a $3 million fund, which was going to write 30 100K checks. We were one of those 100K checks. The process was basically, he came to Dylan's house while we were working out of his lounge room, and was like, I'd like to write you guys a check. And we were like, okay. So it wasn't, wow. I mean, we had to go through a process after that and whatever else, but it wasn't too hardcore. Look, we raised an angel round, which was about $500,000, which was, I think, very hard to a pretty inexperienced, and we going to do a lot of pitch events, and it was like, was that really useful or not? And a lot of them weren't, and there were some sharks out there who were pretty gross, and I think that whole scene's gotten a lot better since where it was in 2014. And then, but I would say that like well, look, no, I'll go to the angel round. I think there were some real learnings in the angel round. So like the angel round, again, it's a sales process. Like, I think it's a useful framework to think about it. And you need to have, whether it's 20 people at top of funnel, 40, 50, 100, you'll read stories, people, in the US, insane founders who are like, I spoke to 400 people to get my company funded. And try to avoid that if you can. I think I'd be a bit more rational. But I do think like you need to have a real number, like a real volume to go through on that side. And so, how do you build that pipeline? That's an interesting question. So for us, we, in Australia at the time, we sort of, we didn't want to go overseas. We're raising a $500,000 round. We had no money at that stage. We couldn't go overseas really. So we were like, okay, I had to find some people locally. There are some obvious people that were easy to find, some VC firms and some family offices that were relatively well known. There are a few good places to speak. So Innovation Bay still runs these dinners, which is really great. And you speak at that. Shout out to Ian and Faden who run that wonderfully. And then, there are other sort of, there used to be this thing called Carnegie's Den, which was a waste of time, but still fun. We won a fancy bottle of champagne out of it. But like, so I think like there's some level of that sort of stuff, but like really the main thing we did was just like look at other similar companies in Australia. either via AngelList or just like other sort of sources who'd gotten angel funding or who'd gotten seed funding or had gotten the Series A, and then you just go and figure out who their investors are. Now, usually you can do that through like press release or Crunchbase or AngelList used to have. I think it still does, but you can sort of sometimes figure out like how what companies, who's invested in what companies and whatever else. But you can also just go to ASIC and just like you have to pay a small fee to find out who the investors are. But that's not like that bad. So if you really want to know who, like I don't know if they're structured this way anymore, but you can just pay the $19 and see pretty much anybody's investment structure.
That's a great idea. I've never thought of that.
Now, like you got to pay $19 each time, so like it's a bit of a pain in the ass. But like you can just go through this thing and build a pipeline and be like, okay, well, so like for us, like we sort of thought that Canva was a somewhat comparable, interesting tool in a sort of similar space. We're like, okay, well, who's invested in Canva? And so you just find that list and then try to see how can I possibly get a warm intro to these people, and if not, do a cold intro and just sort of go from there. And so I don't think anybody from them invested in us, but again, that was a useful sort of group on that side of that. Because they had a few angels in there. We definitely met with 2 or 3 of them. And I think as you get to know some other founders, you sort of ask them about who they'd spoken to, and you just build out this list of people to reach out to. And then it's the goal of, okay, can you get a meeting with them? Okay, can you get a second meeting with them? Okay, can you blah blah blah, get towards a term sheet hopefully. And it's a pain in the ass finding a lead investor for these early rounds, but it's gotten, I think, a lot better. But look, to be honest, when we did the seed round, it was the same process. Build a list. Now you're trying to we got a $1.5 million round there. So, you're trying to you're building a bit of a different list. You're sort of saying, hey, who can we find on this side that's really good, that can write $1 million check, as a lead, and go from that sort of side. And so that led us down a bit of a different path. But again, it's the same core process of, and you have to be kind of creative. It's like, how do you fill your pipeline? And like, there are companies out there that are awesome, that are backed by famous VCs. There are companies out there that are awesome who are backed by like angels and family offices and corporate funds and whatever else. It doesn't matter. Like, to be honest, at the end of the day, like VCs can add some meaningful value, but like by far the most value the VC adds is like capital. You need the capital to grow your business, and that is like I think look, it's nice. Like we've gotten a heap of value out of Airtree 0.9. And to be honest, like, look, Right Click early days, and there's been a bunch of others who've been very meaningful on our journey. I don't want to diminish that at all, but it's also the most important part of it was the capital. So it's like, I don't think it really matters how you do that part. And so I think, you just want to put yourself in a position to succeed there if you can.
Awesome. And how has the dynamic changed with your investor group as you brought on more and more investors?
That's a great question. So, I mean, honestly, we've got a really wonderful group of investors. We've been very lucky. And I think also we were quite strict about who we let invest, because investors can make your life really shit. But for us, I think the main thing that we sort of think about on our side is it's really sort of stage dependent. And actually, to be honest, investors should kind of step aside as the company changes in a funny way. Like, there are people who invested us as angel investors, X years ago. Now that most of them have, in fact, all of them have followed on in various rounds since then. But like, we used to spend a hell of a lot of time with our angels, like getting advice and getting mentorship and talking through that side. And then we'd spend heaps of time with 0.9, sort of getting a lot of advice and whatever else. And to be honest, once we got the Series A in from Airtree, 0.9 is, they don't expect to be the big dog anymore. They expect Airtree to be the big dog, because, Airtree just writes a very large check. And Airtree wants to play that role. Like, they want to step into that role. Now, like, if we go down a path and we end up, closing some, huge Series B or Series C from someone else, again, like, let's sort of, it's not to say that Airtree won't be involved or Point Nine won't be involved, but like there is this sort of, you should be sort of having some level of thing on that side. And I think like, if we were closing if we were ever so lucky to get huge and you close some, huge Series E deal from someone, the kind of company that you are and the kind of needs that you have are going to be more aligned to the person who like funded your Series E versus the person who funded your Series A, because Airtree's expertise is in like A, B, occasional C, and sorry, seed A, B. I think really is their sort of sweet spot, and like they're really good at that, and they provide heaps of value there. But it's also like like to pretend that the angel investor who wrote you a $100K check, who's like a high net worth individual who's like had a really awesome career, like they can provide a lot of great context and value early on. But, again, the Series E investor later on is obviously going to have more context about how to think about an IPO, or whatever else that sort of age and stage, whatever challenges you're facing at that stage are. Again, like, Airtree at a Series A is not necessarily, much as they've been involved in heaps of companies that have gone to IPO. Again, and maybe if you're IPOing in Australia versus the US, you'd be leaning on them pretty heavily. But if you're IPOing, say, in the US, they'd be like, cool, well, you should talk to your, hypothetical future US investors about that. And so I think that you want to have, investors who are sort of comfortable across that side. And so far, at every stage, as we've brought in and look, we've gone to work with some top tier people as well. So like Point Nine know the Airtree guys and think very highly of them. In fact, like John Henderson, who's on our board, like, he and Christoph and Louis have all known each other for years. John used to be a VC in the UK. And so like, they were like excited to work with John. And like, they know that we're in good hands there. And so they're like, do you know what I mean? There's a degree of it sort of makes sense. And I think that's the way you want it to be. Now, unfortunately, that's not the way it is all the time. And so I would really stress to everybody out there when you're considering an investor, just the no asshole rule is a really great and important thing. You want to be in this relationship for a long time. I hope I'm working with John for the next 10 years. I think that, or however long, it goes until, Qwilr hits whatever stage or whatever, but like, you want to be able to work in this thing for a long time. And I think that it's meaningful that you have a good working relationship on that side.
That's a fantastic answer, Mark. I'm conscious of time, so I really want to touch base on two more questions. The first one being a quote from yourself in actually 2017. You said that success is a marriage of excellent engineering and design, plus a murder your darlings mindset. What's a murder your darlings mindset?
Yeah, so murder your darlings is it's an old phrase, and I used to once know who coined it. But it's sort of speaking about, it's sort of speaking in the creative process about, I think it's from a novelist, but he would write this beautiful scene or this beautiful bit of writing or whatever else, and then you get to this re-edit of the book, and that scene kind of, you love it and it's great and it's this clever thing and you've got this really smart sentence in there that's a very witty haha, but you're like, it doesn't make sense in the scheme of the book. If we want to have this narrative flow this way, it's sort of, we need to get rid of it. Or maybe it's in a screenplay or whatever else. It's like, and there can be these things that you work on that you love, that you think are great, but actually with a lot of startups, I think this is true, like less is more. Like sort of be very focused on that core pain point and try to get rid of all the cruft you can to make it as streamlined, as simple, and as deep as possible, because that's where you can find real value, like real long-term, deep value. And I think, look, the whole game of SaaS is to be long-term greedy. It's the whole game is to turn people, to stick around for as long as is humanly possible, to get, real lifetime value out of them. And I think that really does encourage you to be, customer first, and if you're doing SaaS right, you should really care about great support, great product improvements, and also about going deep on things. It's not about having 1,000 very lightweight crappy integrations. It's about having 5 deep excellent ones that are very meaningful to people in that sort of group to get a heap of value out of. And so look, there's gonna be a bunch of paths that you go down that you think are awesome ideas at the time, and you build out this thing and you can sort of envisage this great use case, and it just doesn't really get used. It doesn't really work. And the more you think about actually strategically, where are we going, what matters, in the early days especially, and look, still for us today, every extra little bit of the app that you have there, every extra little bit of code costs maintenance time and costs support docs, and has the chance to confuse a customer or whatever else. And I say all of this, we definitely don't do it as much as we should, but when you deprecate that or kill it or cut it off or whatever else, it's actually a very important positive thing. And I think, I should shout out my co-founder Dylan, because he's the one who really pushes this mindset inside Qwilr. But you can get very attached to pieces of work, and product teams who built it are like, oh, but I built that thing. But if it doesn't serve the higher purpose, if it doesn't serve that core narrative, you really should murder your darlings in that sense. And I think that, it's sort of speaking to the murder your darlings phrase is powerful, because it's they're these little things that you love, but actually to move forward in the right way, you have to kill them. And I think that can be very hard for early startups, because it's quite an emotional thing.
I'm sure that's a lesson that a lot of listeners are going to have to take on board, Mark. So thank you for that. And the last question I have for you is, what does the future hold for Qwilr?
Yeah, I mean, lots. It's really exciting to be in documents at the moment. I think that there is a huge moment happening right now with this move to remote work, and just generally, I think, I just think that the way that the modern document that's coming out of its shell versus this legacy junk that is Word and PDF and PowerPoint, the stuff that teams like Notion are doing, Coda, Airtable, and others around internal collaboration. So how product and marketing and maybe sales, whatever else, are collaborating internally inside a company. It's just fantastic, and getting rid of this idea of the A4 piece of paper, which is just such a stupid concept in the modern web first world, and truly embracing and recognizing that we are web first, and the things that the web enables, that should be brought to everybody and shouldn't be hindered and limited by a bunch of old concepts from a file system that was designed before the web existed. This is all tech from the 80s. And so, obviously Qwilr, our whole mission is to do that for customer facing documents. So how do we make the customer facing, sales, marketing, success experience, even to be honest, in HR around, recruiting and other things like that, that sort of recruiting, really is a sales process. But all of those external public customer facing documents, how do we make that experience a truly web native and beautiful experience? How do you make it great design? How do you sort of bring on board mobile first? How do you make the B2B sales experience, which has been this clunky file-based thing for a long time, how do you bring that into something that looks more like e-commerce? There's this sort of, there's this sort of term like B-commerce out there. I think there's this real interesting trend that's happening on that side. And look, we're just tremendously excited to be in there. We think we've got the best product in market. We think there's a bunch of technical challenges to make it hard for people to sort of copy us well. And so look, we're just excited to keep investing in that, to keep growing, to keep finding great customers who we can look after really well, and turn them, help them have an excellent time with Qwilr, because our whole goal is for them to stick with us for 5-10 years, and have a long, meaningful relationship with them and help them grow their business, and I think really be additive. And I think that, our goal is to, if we can keep doing that and do that well, we'll win. And I think, for Qwilr, we live and die by 3 principles, which is, undeniable bestness, velocity with valor. So, not move fast and break things, move fast, but do it with valor, and look, clarity through collaboration, because those 2 things undeniable bestness and velocity with valor are sometimes feel like they're a bit at odds with each other. But yeah, look, I mean, I think we feel like we've just scratched the surface as what's possible here. You know, if you look at what's possible with regards to, like, you know, web pages at the top of funnel, like all of the science and all of the art and all the thought that goes into landing pages and how we think about that in the funnel conversion process. And then you look at the bottom of the funnel around proposal docs and other stuff like that. And there's just, no one has any idea about what a good proposal looks like. No one has any idea about how to optimize that for conversion rates. And we do. And we're really starting to roll out some more stuff there. I think that there's a whole bunch of stuff that exists in other parts of the world, but doesn't exist in documents yet, that we're so excited to be bringing forward over the next few years.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time out of your, I'm sure, busy day to talk to us. There's just so much insight throughout this podcast that I'm sure the listeners are going to appreciate. So thank you again. And, you know, really excited for what the future holds for Qwilr. We'll be watching with interest.
Thank you, Jason.